The pressurized cabin is warm. Too warm, perhaps, for December over the Pacific, but that's the miracle of it, sitting at 28,000 feet in shirt sleeves, breathing normally, while outside the aluminum skin the temperature hovers at 50 below zero. Captain Robert Morgan adjusts his oxygen mask, then realizes he doesn't need it. Not anymore. Not in a B-29 Superfortress. The cockpit feels more like a Pullman car than a bomber, spacious enough to stand up in, walk around, and almost comfortable. Through the plexiglass nose he can see the curvature of the Earth, the Pacific stretching endlessly below, and somewhere down there, invisible beneath the cloud cover, the Japanese home islands. It's the 14th of December, 1944, and everything Morgan learned about bombing is about to become obsolete. He doesn't know this yet. None of them do. The men of the 20th Air Force believe they're flying the most technologically advanced weapon system ever created, and they're right. The B-29 cost more to develop than the Manhattan Project, more than $3 billion in 1940s money. It can fly higher than any Japanese fighter can reach, faster than any can catch it, farther than any bomber before it. The pressurized cabin means crews can operate in the stratosphere without bulky, heated suits, without the numbing cold that plagued B-17 crews over Europe. Remote-controlled gun turrets, computed fire control, a revolutionary central fire control system that can calculate deflection, temperature, altitude, and airspeed in split seconds. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is supposed to be how modern war works. You fly so high the enemy can't touch you. You bomb with precision from the thin air of the stratosphere, where the physics of flight barely work, where only the most advanced aircraft dare to operate. You return safely to base because altitude equals invulnerability. That's what they learned at MacDill Field in Florida, at Walker Army Airfield in Kansas, at every training base across the American heartland. High altitude, precision bombing, technological superiority. But here's what the training didn't tell them. High altitude doesn't work over Japan. The problem isn't the Japanese defenses, it's the jet stream. At 30,000 feet over Japan, winds blow at 140 miles per hour, sometimes faster. A river of air so powerful it tears bomber formations apart like paper in a hurricane. Bombardiers trying to hit a factory from 6 miles up find their bombs scattered across square miles of countryside. The Norden bomb site, that miracle of American engineering that supposedly can drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 4 miles up, becomes useless when the aircraft carrying it is being buffeted by winds no American meteorologist even knew existed until B-29 seconds started flying into them. And there's something else the training didn't prepare them for: the engines. Those Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone radials, the most powerful piston engines ever built, each producing 2,200 horsepower. They're also the most temperamental engines ever built. They catch fire, often, without warning. The magnesium alloy engine blocks burn so hot that standard fire suppression systems barely slow them down. Crews learn to watch the cylinder head temperature gauges the way sailors watch the horizon for storms, knowing that a few degrees too high means you might have minutes before an engine becomes a blowtorch attached to your wing. Captain Morgan has seen it happen. 3 weeks ago, a B-29 from the 498th Bombardment Group lost an engine to fire over Tokyo. The crew got the fire out, limped back toward Saipan on 3 engines, then lost another to fire over the ocean. They ditched. The pressurized fuselage, so comfortable at altitude, becomes a death trap in water. It sinks fast. 6 of the 11 crew members drowned before rescue aircraft could reach them. So the high-altitude bombing campaign sputters along through the winter of 1944 into early 1945, mission after mission that cost lives and aircraft for results that barely justify the fuel burned. The 21st Bomber Command, operating from Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the Marianas, flies formation after formation into the teeth of the jet stream, drops tons of high-explosive bombs that miss their targets by miles, and watches as crews fail to return. Not because Japanese fighters shoot them down, though some do, but because engines fail, or fires break out, or structural stress from the high-altitude buffeting causes catastrophic failures. The loss rate runs about 5% per mission. Not catastrophic by the standards of the 8th Air Force over Germany, but deeply troubling for an aircraft that was supposed to be nearly invulnerable. And the results are negligible. Japan's war production continues. The factories keep running, the supplies keep moving. In January of 1945, a new commander arrived in the Marianas. Major General Curtis LeMay, 38 years old, already a legend from his time commanding bomber groups over Europe. LeMay has a face like a bulldog and a reputation for results. He doesn't care about doctrine, he doesn't care about what the manuals say. He cares about destroying Japan's ability to make war, and he's willing to try anything that works. For 2 months, LeMay watches the high-altitude campaign fail. He studies intelligence reports. He reads the mission debriefs. He understands what his crews are up against the jet stream that scatters formations, the weather that obscures targets, the engine failures that kill more crews than enemy action, and he understands something else, something the planners back in Washington don't want to acknowledge. Precision bombing isn't working because Japan doesn't have precision targets worth bombing. Germany had concentrated industrial complexes, ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, aircraft plants at Regensburg, oil refineries in the Ruhr. Take out those factories and you cripple German war production. But Japan's industry isn't like that. Japan's war production is dispersed. Small workshops in residential neighborhoods build airplane parts. Home workers assemble components in wooden buildings mixed in with civilian housing. You can't destroy Japan's ability to make war by hitting a few key factories because there aren't a few key factories to hit. What Japan does have is cities made of wood and paper, dense urban neighborhoods where war workers live, where small workshops operate, where the line between military targets and civilian housing barely exists. Cities that burn. That's what LeMay sees in the intelligence reports. That's what the firebomb tests at Dugway proving. Ground in Utah demonstrated drop incendiaries on Japanese-style construction, and it burns hot and fast, creating firestorms that consume everything in their path. There's just one problem with this approach. To drop incendiaries effectively, you need to fly low, much lower, 5,000 feet low, low enough that every anti-aircraft gun in Japan can reach you, low enough that you're trading the one advantage the B-29 was designed to exploit altitude for a tactic that works. In early March of 1945, LeMay called his group commanders together. What he tells them shocks some, horrifies others. They're going to strip most of the defensive armament from the bombers to save weight. They're going to fly at night, when Japanese fighters can't see them. And they're going to fly at 5,000 feet, underneath the jet stream, low enough for accurate bombing, low enough to be sitting ducks for ground fire. The crews, when they hear this, think their commanders have lost their minds. Technical Sergeant Robert Rodenhouse, a B-29 pilot, will later remember his reaction. We thought they could throw the kitchen sink up there and hit us. Can you imagine flying a big 4-engine bomber at 5,000 feet? Why, that was just unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. And like my crew says, I think those generals lost their marbles. They weren't thinking straight. But LeMay isn't crazy. He's done the math. Japanese night fighters are few and poorly equipped. Japanese radar is primitive, and Japanese anti-aircraft guns, while numerous, have a harder time hitting aircraft at night than in daylight. The risk is enormous, yes, but the potential payoff is greater. And most importantly, LeMay understands that high-altitude bombing is killing his crews for nothing. At least this way, if they're going to die, they'll die accomplishing something. The target for the first low-altitude incendiary mission is Tokyo, not the dockyards or the industrial zones on the outskirts. The target is the heart of the city, the Shitamachi district, where wooden buildings pack tightly together, where hundreds of thousands of civilians live and work, where war production happens in thousands of small workshops scattered throughout residential neighborhoods. March 9th, 1945. The mission briefing happens in late afternoon. Crews gather in the operations buildings on Guam, Tinian, and Saipan, and when they see the mission profile on the boards, they know this is different. Altitude, 5,000 to 7,000 feet. Armament, tail guns only. Bomb load, M69 incendiary clusters, each containing 47 individual bomblets filled with napalm. Time over target, after midnight. The bombs themselves are new, relatively speaking. The M69 was developed specifically for use against Japanese cities, based on tests that showed how effectively napalm could ignite Japanese construction. Each incendiary cluster weighs about 500 pounds and breaks apart in the air, scattering the individual bomblets across a wide area. When they hit, they burst into flame, sticky, clinging flame that can't be extinguished with water, that burns at temperatures high enough to melt steel, that sets everything it touches ablaze. The B-29 seconds begin taking off just after sunset. 334 aircraft from the 73rd, 313th, and 314th Bombardment Wings, the largest single raid the 20th Air Force has yet mounted. They take off in darkness, one after another, each loaded with 7 tons of incendiaries, stripped of most of their defensive guns, committed to a tactic that seems to violate everything they learned about strategic bombing. Captain Morgan's aircraft is among them. The takeoff is different without the weight of the defensive armament. The bomber feels lighter, more responsive, almost eager. But as they climb out over the Pacific, heading northwest toward Japan, Morgan keeps thinking about that. 5,000-foot altitude. In a B-29, 5,000 feet feels wrong. It feels exposed. This aircraft was designed to operate in the stratosphere, where the air is thin and enemy fighters struggle to reach you. Flying it at 5,000 feet is like taking a racehorse and hitching it to a plow. The flight north takes hours. They fly in darkness, individual aircraft rather than tight formations, each crew alone with their thoughts. The pressurized cabin, that marvel of engineering, seems almost absurd now. Why bother with pressurization when you're flying low enough that you could open a window without passing out? But there's no time to modify the aircraft further. The cabin stays pressurized, the crews stay comfortable, and outside, the Pacific slides past in the darkness. They cross the Japanese coast just after midnight on March 10th. The weather is clear, unusual for this time of year. Tokyo spreads below them, darker than it should be. The city is under blackout restrictions, trying to hide from bombers. But the Pathfinder aircraft have already arrived, dropping their loads of M47 incendiaries mixed with colored marker bombs to outline the target area. From 5,000 feet, the crews can see the fires starting, small at first, scattered points of orange light in the darkness. Then the main force arrives. Wave after wave of B-29 seconds, each dropping its load of incendiaries across the Shitamachi district. The bomblets scatter as they fall, spreading across blocks of wooden buildings, and when they hit, they ignite. Within minutes, the scattered fires begin to merge. Within half an hour, individual fires have become conflagrations. Within an hour, the conflagrations have become a firestorm. A firestorm is not simply a large fire. It's a meteorological event, a fire so hot and so large that it creates its own weather system. The superheated air rises rapidly, creating a powerful updraft. Cool air rushes in from the sides to replace it, creating winds of gale force that feed more oxygen to the flames. The temperature at the center can reach 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing survives it. Nothing can. The crews see it developing from their cockpits. They see the fires spreading, merging, growing brighter and brighter until it seems impossible that anything could burn that hot. They smell it too, even at 5,000 feet. Even inside the pressurized cabins, the smell of burning wood, burning paper, burning flesh seeps in. Some crew members vomit, some pray. Some just watch, transfixed by the horror of what they're creating. The heat from the firestorm becomes so intense that aircraft flying through it are tossed around like toys. Turbulence from the thermal columns throws bombers hundreds of feet up or down in seconds. Some aircraft flip upside down. Some lose pieces of their tail surfaces, melted or torn away by the superheated air. The bomber stream continues for nearly 3 hours, aircraft after, aircraft adding their loads to the inferno below, and by the end of it, 16 square miles of Tokyo are burning. On the ground, the reality is beyond description. The Shitamachi district was one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, home to somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million people living in wooden houses, packed so tightly together that many streets were barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. When the incendiaries began to fall, people tried to flee, but the fires spread faster than anyone could run. The winds created by the firestorm reached speeds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, strong enough to knock people off their feet, strong enough to drag people back toward the flames. The canals that crisscrossed the district filled with people seeking refuge in water. Most of them boiled to death when the water itself heated to near boiling temperatures. Others suffocated when the firestorm consumed all the oxygen in the air. Some were crushed in the panicked crowds at bridges and canal crossings. Many simply burned where they stood, unable to outrun the flames. By dawn on March 10th, the firestorm had burned itself out. What remained was a landscape that resembled the surface of the moon, flat, grey, lifeless. Aerial photographs taken the next day showed vast stretches of Tokyo reduced to ash. The wooden buildings had burned so completely that they left almost nothing behind. Here and there, the concrete shells of larger buildings still stood, gutted by fire. The rest was simply gone. The death toll will never be precisely known. Japanese records were incomplete, and many victims were cremated so completely by the firestorm that they left no remains to count. Conservative estimates place the number of dead at 80,000. More likely estimates reach 100,000. Some Japanese sources claim the toll exceeded 120,000. In a single night, more people died in Tokyo than would later die in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The B-29 seconds return to their bases in the Marianas as the sun rises. 14 aircraft fail to return a loss rate of just over 4%, actually lower than typical high-altitude missions. The crews are exhausted, shaken, some traumatized by what they've seen. But by any military measure, the mission is an overwhelming success. Tokyo's industrial capacity in the targeted districts has been effectively destroyed. More importantly, the tactic works. Low-altitude incendiary attacks can destroy Japanese cities. LeMay doesn't hesitate. Over the next 10 days, he ordered similar missions against Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe. The pattern repeats night attacks at low altitude, massive incendiary loads, firestorms that consume square miles of urban area. By March 19th, the major industrial cities of Japan have been subjected to devastation on a scale unprecedented in human history. And still, LeMay pushes forward. The psychological effect on Japan is enormous. Japanese civil defense had prepared for bombing. They'd practiced evacuations, set up firefighting equipment, trained citizens to fight fires. But nothing prepared them for this. You can't fight a firestorm. You can only flee from it, and even that often fails. The psychological impact of knowing that any night might bring the B-29 seconds, that no defense can stop them, that your wooden house might become kindling for an inferno. This terror is as effective as the physical destruction. For the B-29 crews, the experience is profoundly disorienting. They trained for precision bombing, for surgical strikes against military targets. They trained to fly so high that the people below would be invisible, abstract, not quite real. Now they're flying low enough to see the people running from the flames. They're dropping incendiaries designed specifically to set cities on fire, designed to kill civilians along with war workers, designed to destroy indiscriminately. Some crews struggle with this. The moral weight of it becomes unbearable for some men. They signed up to bomb factories and military installations, not to burn people alive in their homes. But the military necessity argument is powerful. Japan's war production is genuinely dispersed through residential areas. Home workers really do produce military components. Small workshops really do contribute to Japan's ability to continue fighting. And every day the war continues. Americans die in the Pacific, die in kamikaze attacks, die fighting on islands like Iwo Jima and soon Okinawa. The bomber crews tell themselves that their mission shortens the war, saves American lives, that the alternative, an invasion of the Japanese home islands, would cost far more lives on both sides. Some believe this completely. Some believe it enough to keep flying missions. Some don't believe it at all but fly anyway because that's what soldiers do. By the end of March 1945, the 20th Air Force had effectively run out of major urban targets. The big cities have been burned. LeMay turns his attention to smaller cities, places with populations of 50,000 or 100,000, places that barely qualified as targets under any pre-war definition of strategic bombing. The B-29 seconds visit them anyway, one after another, systematically working down the list. The irony is inescapable. The most technologically advanced bomber ever built, designed to operate at altitudes where human beings shouldn't be able to survive without pressure suits, designed with pressurized cabins and computed fire control and remote gun turrets. This marvel of engineering achieves its greatest success by flying low and slow, stripped of its defensive armament, dropping primitive incendiary bombs that work through brute force rather than precision. Everything the B-29 was, designed to be fast, high-flying, untouchable, becomes irrelevant. The pressurized cabin that cost millions to develop and added thousands of pounds to the aircraft's weight, useless at 5,000 feet. The remote-controlled gun turrets, with their advanced fire control computers, removed to save weight. the ability to fly above 40,000 feet, never used operationally after the switch to low-altitude tactics. What the B-29 becomes instead is a delivery truck for incendiaries, a platform for area bombing, a tool for the systematic destruction of Japanese cities. It's effective, terribly effective, but not in the way anyone planned. The aircraft that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of precision warfare became the instrument of the most indiscriminate bombing campaign in history. The human cost of this transformation extends beyond the Japanese cities. The B-29 crews themselves pay a price that statistics don't fully capture. They continue to lose aircraft and men, not as many as during the high-altitude campaign, but the losses continue. Engine failures still happen. Mechanical problems still kill crews. And now they're also dealing with the psychological burden of what they're doing. Some crews cope by focusing on the technical aspects of the mission. They talk about bomb patterns and fuel consumption and wind drift. They avoid thinking about what happens on the ground. Others embrace the hatred, convince themselves that every Japanese civilian is complicit in the war, that the firebombing is just retribution for Pearl Harbor and the Bataan Death March and all the other Japanese atrocities. Some simply shut down emotionally, doing their jobs mechanically, refusing to think about it at all. Technical Sergeant Chester Marshall, a radio operator on a B-29 out of Tinian, will later describe flying over burning cities. "You could smell it. That's what got me. Even at our altitude, even inside the aircraft, you could smell the burning, sweet and terrible at the same time. And you knew what it was. You knew exactly what was burning. There's no forgetting that smell." By May of 1945, Japan's urban landscape had been fundamentally altered. Over 60 cities have been subjected to incendiary attacks. Millions of people have been made homeless. Industrial production has collapsed in many areas, not because factories were precisely targeted, but because the workers have nowhere to live, because the supply chains have been disrupted, because the infrastructure that supports manufacturing has been burned away. The statistics are staggering. By the end of the war, B-29 incendiary attacks will have destroyed approximately 180 square miles of Japanese urban area. The death toll from the firebombing campaign is estimated at somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people, more than the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Another 8 million people are rendered homeless. 40% of Japan's 66 largest cities are more than half destroyed, and through it all, the B-29 crews keep flying. They fly in May, when the remaining large cities are hit again. They fly in June, when targets become increasingly difficult to find because so much has already been destroyed. They fly in July, when the list of unbombed cities becomes so short that the Air Force begins warning cities in advance, dropping leaflets that name the next targets, psychological warfare mixed with genuine humanitarian concern. The warnings are real. Leaflets dropped on Japanese cities list names of places scheduled for attack, urging civilians to evacuate. Some do. Many can't. They have nowhere to go, no way to transport their possessions, no guarantee that wherever they flee won't be bombed next. The warnings serve a dual purpose. They might save some civilian lives, and they absolutely terrorize the entire population, because now everyone knows the bombers are coming, and no one can do anything to stop them. In late July, the nature of the campaign shifted slightly. The B-29 seconds begin mining Japanese harbors and inland waters, using their precision to lay minefields that strangle what remains of Japan's shipping. They also begin practicing a new type of mission, individual aircraft flying at high altitude carrying special ordnance. Only a handful of crew members know what this new mission is about. The rest of the 20th Air Force continues the firebombing campaign, burning through the list of secondary and tertiary targets. On August 6, 1945, a single B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 named Bockscar drops a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. These missions received all the attention, becoming the defining moments of the B-29's war, the events that supposedly forced Japan's surrender. But by the time those atomic bombs fell, the conventional firebombing campaign had already destroyed more Japanese cities, killed more Japanese civilians, and done more damage to Japan's ability to continue fighting than the two atomic strikes combined. The atomic bombs were militarily significant, primarily because they demonstrated that the United States could now destroy entire cities with single aircraft, single bombs, without warning, without defense. But Japan had already experienced the destruction of cities. They'd already experienced attacks they couldn't defend against. The atomic bombs added a new dimension of horror: instant obliteration, radiation sickness, the promise of even worse to come, but the pattern of urban destruction was already well established. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The reasons are complex: the atomic bombs, the Soviet declaration of war, the strangling naval blockade, the complete collapse of Japan's strategic position. But the firebombing campaign, the sustained destruction of Japanese cities by B-29 seconds, flying low and slow with loads of incendiaries, is certainly among those reasons. The campaign demonstrated that Japan could be destroyed piecemeal, city by city, until nothing remained but ash and rubble. For the B-29 crews, victory brings a complicated mix of emotions: relief that the war is over, that they won't have to fly more missions, that they survived, pride in their contribution to victory, and for some, though not all, guilt over what they participated in. The men who flew those missions will spend the rest of their lives processing what they did, what they saw, what it meant. Captain Robert Morgan, who flew B-29 seconds in the closing months of the war, will later reflect, "We were told we were shortening the war, saving lives in the long run. Maybe that was true. Probably it was true. But it didn't make the smell go away. It didn't make the images go away. We did what we had to do. We did what we were ordered to do. But there's no glory in burning cities, no matter how necessary it might have been." The B-29 itself becomes a symbol, but not the symbol it was meant to be. It was supposed to represent the triumph of American technology, the ability to wage war with precision and minimal risk to American lives. Instead, it becomes associated with mass destruction, with the firebombing of cities, with the atomic bombs that ended the war. The aircraft's technological marvels, its pressurized cabin, its high-altitude capability, its advanced fire control, all become footnotes to the reality of how it was actually used. After the war, the Army Air Forces commissioned studies of the strategic bombing campaign. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviews survivors, examines records, tries to determine how effective the various aspects of the bombing campaign actually were. The conclusions are sobering. The high-altitude precision bombing campaign against Japanese industry was largely ineffective. The low-altitude incendiary campaign was devastatingly effective, but primarily because it destroyed cities indiscriminately rather than hitting specific military targets. The survey's analysts struggle with the moral implications. The bombing campaign killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. It destroyed cultural treasures, temples, and residential neighborhoods that had no military value. It created a precedent for total war that would haunt strategic planning for generations. But it also, probably, shortened the war. It also, probably, saved American lives and even Japanese lives that would have been lost in an invasion. The moral calculus is impossible to resolve cleanly. Some of the B-29 crews become advocates for strategic air power, arguing that what they did proves the decisiveness of bombing in modern war. Others become opponents of strategic bombing, arguing that what they did proves the moral bankruptcy of trying to win wars by destroying cities. Most simply return to civilian life, carry their experiences privately, rarely to talk about what they saw and did over Japan in the spring and summer of 1945. The aircraft themselves have varied fates. Some are scrapped immediately after the war, melted down for their aluminum. Others are mothballed, stored in the desert in case they're needed again. A few remain in service, used for reconnaissance, for research, for testing new equipment. When the Korean War begins in 1950, B-29 seconds are pressed back into combat service, flying missions over North Korea, discovering that jet fighters have made them obsolete just 5 years after they dominated the skies over Japan. The last B-29 mission flown by the United States Air Force happened in June of 1960. By then, the aircraft is a relic, a reminder of a different kind of war. The strategic bombing campaigns of World War II, with their mass formations of heavy bombers and their acceptance of enormous civilian casualties, belong to a different era, or so everyone hopes. But the lessons of the B-29 campaign over Japan remain relevant. The tension between technological capability and actual use persists. The moral questions about attacking civilian populations, about the relationship between military necessity and ethical warfare, about whether the ends justify the means, these questions don't disappear just because the war ended. If anything, they become more urgent in an age of even more destructive weapons. The B-29 crews who flew those low-altitude incendiary missions carried knowledge that most people never have to face. They understood, viscerally and undeniably, what it means to destroy a city. They saw the flames from 5,000 feet. They smelled the burning. They knew that every ton of incendiaries they dropped meant death for people below. Death by fire, death by suffocation, death by being crushed in panicked crowds trying to escape an inferno. Some of them made peace with this knowledge, some never did. But all of them lived with the irony that the most advanced bomber ever built, the aircraft that represented the cutting edge of American technological prowess, achieved its greatest success by abandoning everything it was designed to do. The pressurized cabin sat unused at low altitude. The high-altitude capability became irrelevant. The precision bombing doctrine gave way to area attacks with primitive incendiaries. In the end, the B-29 over Japan became a testament not to the triumph of technology, but to the primacy of effectiveness over elegance. It didn't matter that the aircraft was designed for one kind of mission, if a completely different kind of mission worked better. It didn't matter that crews had trained for high-altitude precision bombing if low-altitude incendiary attacks achieved results. What mattered was winning the war, and the B-29 did that, but not in any way that matched its intended purpose. The men who flew those missions understood this better than anyone. They'd trained in the most sophisticated bomber in the world, learned to operate its complex systems, and mastered the art of high-altitude formation flying. Then they'd stripped out the defensive armament, flown low and slow into the teeth of Japanese defenses, and dropped napalm on cities until those cities ceased to exist. The disconnect between what they'd prepared for and what they actually did defined their war. Years later, decades later, some of those men would visit Japan. They'd walk through Tokyo, through Osaka, through cities that had been rebuilt from ash and rubble into modern metropolises. They'd meet Japanese people who remembered the firebombing, who'd survived the flames, who'd lost family members in the inferno. These encounters were invariably difficult, emotionally wrenching, impossible to neatly resolve. Because, what do you say? How do you explain that you were part of something that killed 100,000 people in a single night, that you did it again and again and again, until dozens of cities were destroyed, that you believed at the time and maybe still believe that it was necessary, that it shortened the war, that it saved lives in the long run? These truths coexist uneasily, without resolution, without redemption that satisfies everyone. The B-29 that flew those missions, that elegant and sophisticated aircraft with its pressurized cabin and remote-controlled turrets, carried more than just incendiaries. It carried the weight of a new kind of warfare, a warfare where technology advanced faster than ethics could keep pace, where the line between military and civilian targets blurred into irrelevance, where strategic necessity demanded tactics that violated every pre-war conception of how civilized nations should fight. The crews in those pressurized cabins, comfortable at 5,000 feet, where comfort was never the point, understood that they were participating in something unprecedented. Whether they saw it as necessary or abhorrent or some complicated mixture of both, they knew. They were part of a campaign that would be studied, debated, condemned, and justified for generations. They knew that what they were doing would define how the world understood strategic bombing and would shape the ethics of warfare for decades to come. And they knew, perhaps most importantly, that all the sophisticated technology that made the B-29 such a marvel, the pressurization, the altitude capability, the computed fire control had ultimately mattered less than simple effectiveness. The war wasn't won by flying higher or faster or more precisely. It was won by burning cities until Japan had nothing left to fight with. That was the truth. The B-29 crews carried home from the Pacific, the truth they lived with for the rest of their lives. The most advanced bomber in the world succeeded by becoming a simple tool of destruction. The comfortable pressurized cabin at 30,000 feet gave way to low-altitude terror. The precision doctrine collapsed into area bombing. And in that collapse, in that transformation from technological marvel to instrument of mass destruction, lies the story of the B-29 over Japan. A story not of triumph, but of terrible effectiveness, not of progress, but of what humans will do to win wars. Thank you for reading. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.